Okay, so let's see some examples of using intents to activate some components. Now, I have a very simple application here that just has 3 classes in it, has 2 activities, one I've called My Activity, the other I've called Other Activity, and a service called My Service. Now, my main activity, I have a few menu options. One of those options runs the service. The other options shows the other activity. Right? So if we want to actually hook these menu options up so they can do things, we'll use intents to do that. Right? So if on my show other activity, if I want to show this other activity class, all I need to do here, of course, is create an intent. Right, in that intent, I got to pass the context in, so I'll just pass this, and I'll just pass in the class name. So I've got that there. So now to show the activity, all I have to do is say start activity, and then pass in my intent. Right now, to do that for service, it works very similarly. I create an intent. Again, this is an explicit intent, so I'll just create it, pass in the context, and I'll pass in my class name for my service. Now to launch the service, I'll call start service and pass in that intent. Right, so that takes care of hooking those guys up. Now, just so we can kind of get a sense of what's going on here, if I go into my service, we notice that we've got this onStart command, so each time we pass that the intent, our onStart command gets created. Now, services are one of these cases where it's kind of interesting because when you call start service the first time for a given service, it gets fully created, and then the intent is passed to onStart command. Each time after that, when you send an intent, the service can still be running, and so then onStart command is called over and over again for us, right? So that it only creates the service if it's not already running. If it is running, it'll just keep using the onStart command for us. Now, in the case of an activity like other activity, the tendency is going to be for it to create it for us over and over again, right? So let's just go ahead and run this, and let's get a sense of see how that actually works for us and see how that behaves in terms of creating or reusing the instance. Okay, so I have my application up and running here. Right, so if I go in and I choose menu, I say show other activity, hit my breakpoint. You can see it goes here and it's creating my other activity as we would expect, so we'll let that finish. Go back to the emulator. I'm in my other activity. If I go back, now I say show it again. Notice that I hit my on create again, right? I'm creating it each time. Okay, so now let's take a look at the service. If I say menu, run service, now first time, of course, it creates it because it's not running. I let it go. It goes to my onStart command the next time. That's what we expect. But now if I go back to the application and I say menu, run service, notice this time it just goes right to onStart command. Right? It doesn't create it. So that's an example of an intent being used to activate or communicate with an existing component rather than starting one from scratch. Let's look at another way that intents come in handy. We talk about intents being used to activate components, and very often we do that explicitly, right? With saying things like start service or start activity. But very often there are features that are documented to actually say if you give it an intent and a user takes some action, it'll go ahead and perform that for you. A great example of that are what are called foreground services. Right? Foreground services allow you to put an icon at the top of the screen. If the user clicks on that, it allows you to kick off some action, and that uses intents. Now, the details of the way all that works is outside the scope of this course. If you're interested in that, check out the Pluralsight services course. That goes into all the details of how that works. But looking at it here just from the intent standpoint. Right, so if I go down here, and I set up my foreground service, if I give it an intent, when the user clicks on my option in the status bar, it'll actually send that intent for me, which allows me to display an activity. Right? So say I want to display my main activity here. Right? What I can do here is when it's time for the intent, I'll just create the intent. Again, I got to give it the context. And I'm going to give it my activity, that class. Right? So that way, we create this instance, and when the user clicks on it, it will actually display the activity for the user. All right, so let's just go ahead and run this. Okay, so now I have the application on my emulator here. I'm going to go in here and just run it. Now, one thing I noticed here is that I put a timestamp on when it's created here. So this is 210612. Right, so we just look at the 612. I do that for a reason because I want to show you something that happens. If I go in here and I say menu, run service, it goes ahead and runs my service. You can see up here at the top, there's that status bar thing I was talking about. Right, I'm going to pull this down, and when I click on it, it'll actually display my activity again for me. I pull that down, click on that, and you see that I've got my activity. Now you notice I've got a timestamp here, right? 2106:40. The other one was 612, right? So this is 640. So you see it created a second instance of that activity. Right? Now in some cases that's fine. In other cases that can be confusing, because watch what happens now is that if I say menu, exit app, my intent basics goes away, but notice that the other one's still there. Now in this case we have a timestamp to help differentiate it. But imagine if this was a traditional form, that could be very confusing for the user, right? They think they just exited it, and again, they're looking at the same screen again. Right, so this is a great example of how, rather than just sending intents and letting them kind of have their default behavior, maybe we can use one of the flags that we set to help us control behavior. Right, so let's take a look at a flag we have that can help us with that. Okay, now I'm looking here at the intent documentation, and there's a flag that says flag activity single top. And what this flag does is it says that, you know what, if the activity you're trying to display is already at the top of the stack, well, don't create a new one. Just go ahead and use that same one again. Right? So this is kind of a great example to do that. Right? And it also shows us how we can control the behavior a little bit of how these intents are sent. So let's go back into our application code here. So what I'm going to do now is that in my intent, I'm going to add a flag. I'm going to add the flag intent. I'm going to choose my flag activity single top, and that'll take care of that for us. The other thing that's helpful here, this can demonstrate, is that this is a case we're going to send an intent to the same activity more than once, right? So that's a great way to see the differences how we access the activity. Excuse me, how we access the intent from an activity. I go to my activity here. Right, so in my on create, what I might want to do here, if I want to get the intent here, I'm just going to call get intent because that gives me access to the intent that created me. Now, if I want to get the one that's sent to me on successive occasions, right, that's where I'm going to override a method. And so I'm going to go in here and just say code, override methods, and I'm just going to choose the on new intent method here. So in this case, I just want to go ahead and log this. All right, so it demonstrates that difference there. Okay, so let's just go ahead and run this. So we'll go ahead and select it. Okay, it runs it for us. We'll go ahead and start our service. Before I do that, notice that we've got our time here is 10:56. Menu run service. That fires up our service for us. Now when I go up here, I click on it. Notice I've still got my 10:56. It didn't create a duplicate one. That way, when the user goes here and says menu exit, it actually exits as opposed to showing them that same screen over again. Now if we look at our logcat here, we can see we had our activity when it was first created. Right, on create, and that shows us the intent that was used to initially created. If I scroll down here, when the second intent came through, that's when the on new intent got called. Right, so we can see that we're getting those different behaviors from the different places there. When the activity was first created, on create was called, we got that initial intent with that get intent. When we wanted to see the successive intents that came into the activity, those came in through the on new intent.